Anyway, Dan and Benny in the Ring is a podcast that everybody ought to listen to. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have Hotchkiss Featherbottom put it on my playlist because I don't know how to work that shit. But guys, in all seriousness, keep doing what you're doing. Keep plugging away. You can do it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Sebastiano, joined as always, back from the weathering the storm, literally, the player himself, Benny Scala. Benny, how you holding up?
Dan, when I say I'm happy to be here tonight, I really mean I'm happy to be here tonight. Last Tuesday night, I was literally sleeping on the floor of a middle school gymnasium. And let me tell you something. For a guy my age with a bad back, that is not a good thing. And when I drove home on Thursday morning, I didn't even know if I had a house or not. And thankfully, everything's okay. And I'm back in the saddle again. Well, that's what she said anyway.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. And this week, we'll talk about it as the show goes on. Next week, we have our big 200th episode. But this week, Benny, we have some exciting news. We've been doing this for years. We've had some interactions and some partnerships in the past. This is our first sponsor, and why don't you tell everybody who's got Dan and Benny's back from now on?
Absolutely. So, folks, if you've been injured in a car accident, make sure you speak to our good friend Adam Burbrower at the Burbrower Law Firm. Adam and his crew do things the right way and get great results. Now, not only is this guy a great attorney, the dude has framed pictures of guys like Ernie Ladd and Johnny Rods in his office. I mean, how cool is that? So if you see Adam climbing the ladder at your community pool to nail a triple Lindy or maybe the ropes at a local arena, you'll notice superstar Billy Graham tattooed on his back and Bret Hart actually on his chest. So Adam is not only the man of the hour, the man with the legal power, too sweet to be sour, he is also the excellence of elocution. And besides being a great guy, he's also an avid WWF historian. Who else is going to get you a great settlement while at the same time breaking down classic Silvano Souza matches? So, yeah, check out Adam at burbrowerlaw.com. Follow him on Facebook. And do not forget to tell him that Dan and Benny sent you.
And it's great stuff. Like I said, next week, episode 200, we have a huge show planned. We'll pitch that at the end of the evening. But tonight, Benny, we love to talk. And you can't talk about wrestling, and I mean this full pun intended. You can't talk about wrestling without talking about wrestling's talkers, and that's not just the promos. That's the men behind the microphone. And we're going to talk tonight about probably the best to ever do it, and not just wrestling, but I would say Mount Rushmore of sports. Period. So, Benny, we have a special guest joining us this evening to talk about the legacy, life and legacy and career of his father. Why don't you tell everybody who's joining us this evening?
Yeah, Dan, we've had so many sons and daughters of wrestling legends on this show over the years. And without exception, to use my ballpark reference, that they hit it out of the ballpark. And I'm sure tonight will be no exception. Gordon Solie is generally regarded as the GOAT and the dean of wrestling announcers. And I'd be shocked if, I spoke to any true wrestling fan. And, we talked about the Mount Rushmore of great wrestling announcers. And if somebody did not include him, I'd be absolutely shocked. So that being said, I'm pleased to welcome his son, Jonard Solie. Jonard, welcome to Dan and Benny in the Ring.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very much. Dan, I love the opening of the show. Did a great job there. I'm happy to be here and, we'll talk about my dad. Whatever you want to know, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Absolutely. Your father's come up numerous times on the program because you can't talk about some of the moments and matches that are often regarded as best ever without realizing the importance he had on them. So I want to start with what I kind of feel is obvious, but should be a fascinating story. What was it like growing up being the son of arguably the greatest commentator ever? I mean, did you have conversations with your friends and classmates about your dad being on TV and how much you just loved what he was doing?
You broke up there. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Actually, that's a little bit. It'll be a little bit of a surprise for you, but when I was little, my parents got divorced. So I went up to Illinois with my mom and my sister to live with my stepfather from first grade or second grade on, and till I was a senior in high school. After I graduated, then I came down to Florida. During that period, I only met my dad once.
Wow.
We came down to Florida, and my mom had set up a visitation, but it was only for an hour. So there was a lot of bitterness between my mom and my father. And so my mom didn't speak highly of my dad when I was little. And this is the thing I think that most parents, it's a mistake that most parents make, you know, because when I got down to Florida, I told my dad, I said, I've heard a lot of things about you. I said, but we're going to go from day one. And so, you know, if you prove that my mom's right, you'll prove it. If not, you'll prove that she's wrong. And we'll find out what kind of person you are, and you'll find out what kind of person I am. So that was probably when I was in junior high school, when I met him the one time. But then when I came down my senior year for Christmas, that's when I told him that. And after being here for Christmas, I decided I wanted to come back to Florida. I wanted to get to know this man. That was my father. I mean, I was raised by a father, and, you know, we have two fathers. We are three, you know, the Lord, and then our fathers. And then if you're a step parent, you have a stepfather. And my stepfather was a very intelligent man, and he actually taught me a lot about logic and always thinking, you know, about what you're going to do first. So whereas then when I met my real dad, he was more of a wheeling dealer, you know, and was always venturing into something new. So it was another new experience for me on it. So after graduation, that's when I came down here and really got to know him. And so I was already out of high school. A few of my friends from high school knew of my dad because they came down on spring break with me and met him and everything. And a couple of people actually moved to Florida later, so they would contact me and, you know, talk about my dad and everything. So that was just when I was 18, I really got to know him and started to get to know him and hung around with him. Worked at his dad owned one of the gas stations downtown, so I worked down there for a while, you know, and you know, just really got to know him there. And it was an experience watching. I didn't know he was famous, so it was different seeing him when we'd be walking down the street and people would come up to him and say, "Hey, Gordon, how's it going?" and everything. Dad would just start talking to him. So as an 18-year-old, I was really impressed by that.
So growing up, you said in Illinois, correct?
Yeah.
Were you a wrestling fan at all, or did you know what your dad did?
Yes, I did. But probably mom didn't really talk about it. You know, she'd just talk, she would complain when the child support check wouldn't come, you know. But no, she never really talked about him as wrestling and everything. But I did know that that's what he did.
Right. Was the CWF show available where you lived or no?
No.
Okay. Did you watch, like, I guess Illinois would have been what, like Dick the Bruiser territory maybe?
Yeah.
Did you watch any of that?
No, actually not.
Okay.
Didn't watch any wrestling when I was younger.
Wow.
Young at all. You know, I was just into different things. You know, it wasn't until I reached 18, come down here, then did I start to follow wrestling.
So that had to be pretty awesome, you know, hanging out with your dad in public, and, you know, because I mean, if we're talking like maybe the late 70s, early 80s,
early 70s.
Early 70s. Well, even then,
70s.
everybody in Florida knew who your dad was then.
Oh yeah. 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 Everybody around knew him but me. And, like I said, it was just funny how people would just walk up and start talking to him and he'd start talking to them. And he always had time to talk to fans that I noticed. The one thing right off the bat, I'd pull into the 7-Eleven with him and all of a sudden the car would be surrounded by people that were coming into the 7-Eleven. When they noticed him, they'd start talking to him. And I came out and I asked him one time, I said, does that ever bother you? And he said, no. He said, they're the ones that pay my salary. So
Yeah,
I have all the time in the world to talk to them.
Wow. Good attitude.
Yeah, I thought so myself. And I mean, even when we went out Friday nights, I joined him for dinner. We all had for pizza. And again, people would talk to him and he always had time. Never once did I hear him say, I'm busy, I'm eating with my family. He just would sit and talk to him.
They pick his brain for who's going to win a match, an upcoming match at the in Tampa.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they would say, or they complain to him about somebody getting, knocked out. One of the baby faces, their best person. They were like, "Oh, he got knocked out." That's so mean. They ganged up on him and everything. And Dad just continued with the conversation with him.
Played kayfabe to the max, right?
Yeah. Well, even when people would stop to talk to him about and ask him, like, "Hey, wrestling's fake and all this and everything." Dad was always, without a doubt, could say, "Hey, I can set up a match for you, and then you can let me know if it's."
You get in the ring with Bob Roop and try to break his sugar hold, right?
Yeah, right. But no, he worked out he got in the ring with a lot of these guys, to learn about the moves and the holds and what they did to the body.
That's real dedication, man.
Yeah. Yeah, and he also got the autonomy of the body and started studying that. So he knew that when you pulled your arm back, what it was affecting, pulled the leg, what it was affecting. They got hit in the gut, the effects. And he always talked about the brain moving in the head when somebody got smacked. He says, and that brain is still going back and forth.
It was a clinic listening to him. It really was.
Yeah. Definitely, without a doubt. But he was a lot of fun even when he was off work, especially at home. People would call up and especially back in those days, you had Reno rats, and these girls would go to all the matches in Florida, and they would follow the wrestlers to the matches. You don't find that today because who's going to go to Miami and then tomorrow night be in Texas? It's not happening. But local talent, they would do that, and they would, they'd even drive the wrestlers. But we got a phone call one night from one, and the whole family was there, and Dad put it on the speakerphone, but everybody else was supposed to be quiet, and he carried on a conversation with them. But that was just the way he was.
Yeah.
It's funny. You talk about the getting hit in the head. It's like, to know, I mean, this would have been what, 30 years before CTE even entered the lexicon.
Mm-hmm.
And he was already understanding it. That's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. He wanted to he always tried to keep up on things, and he wanted it to where when he was announcing something that he kept the people on the edge of their seats.
Absolutely.
Of what's going to happen, what's going to go on, and that was his main goal, is just keep them on their edge of their seats, because back then the announcers had a different job, or the announcers and the wrestlers had a different job than they do today. The announcers are the ones that would, at the end of the match or the end of the night, would tell people, make sure you hurry down and get your tickets for next Tuesday night's matches at the Armory, and just promote it. Whereas today you've got the internet that promotes it. You got a variety of other things that promote it. Back then, it was strictly TV, or they'd go around and put posters up on telephone poles to get people, or you would get on a radio talk show, and you'd find one or two stations that were good to get on, like Ron and Ron back in the days in Tampa. They were excellent to get on. That was their job, was to promote it and make it sound real, to where people would, go like, wow, is that really happening?
Yeah.
And the whole gig was to keep it, mysteriously, keep it from, knowing what's going on.
It's funny. That was an old Wahoo McDaniel expression. You may not believe it's real, but I'll make you believe I'm real. Like, even knowing what you knew about wrestling being scripted, your dad just gave it that extra layer of excitement that, you're hanging on the edge of your seat, even knowing it's, I'm not going to say not real, but you know what I mean? Like he could add that flair. And I want to backtrack for a second to your dad. Obviously, everyone, you talked about the travel and we've talked about the wrestling, everyone thinks Gordon Solie in Florida, same breath, but your dad was actually born in Minneapolis. Do you know the story of how he ended up from Minnesota, how he ended up in Florida?
Oh yeah. Yeah. After high school, he went into the Air Force and he did radio in the Air Force. And after he got out of the Air Force, he and a buddy of his from the Air Force, they went to Arkansas and they were working there. And that's where they met my mom and a friend of hers. And they all on a dare got married together without really knowing each other. And then from there, he came to Florida with my mom and started working radio and at some different radio stations in Plant City. He also worked at a car dealership. At a used car dealership, Bud Shirks. It was on Gandy Boulevard. And they actually had a playground right there in the middle of the automobile dealership there, which was unusual, to have that. But he worked there for a while. He then also worked for PBS station in Tampa, and he volunteered there. He worked the cameras. He did everything because he wanted to know as much as possible about how a show was done and the workings of behind the camera. So he did his time there. And then he also ended up doing some charity work for him on the raise money on the events. And that's how we ended up getting our monkey. We had a woolly monkey in our backyard. Yeah, we called him Monte. So anytime anybody went out of town, when they got somewhere, they were always to call person to person, ask for Monte. That way we knew you made it there.
Oh, wow. Okay. There you go.
Then it was like, nah, sorry, Monte's kind of tied up right now, or Monte's up a tree. We just didn't know what was going on, but that's how we communicated.
Wow.
That was just another way of saving $1. But he had bought a place out in Lake Keystone area. He and another guy and friend of his, and he ended up needing the money, so he sold his half to Gordon. So then that's where Dad built the house, an A-frame house, and it was on it's on Solie Road. They named the road after him that's into. So we got a memorial out there.
Is that in Newport Richey, Jonard?
No, that's in Tampa, out
all right.
Out off of Gun Highway.
Oh, all right. I got you.
A place called Fox's Corner.
I know where it is. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And but it was kind of nice out there because we had the lake and we had the houseboat. We had a blue and gold McCall. Besides the monkey. So we had the monkey, but in mornings we'd take him out unhook his leash. He'd run outside to the yard, get on his pen. We'd hook him up to the leash there, and he'd climb up and down the trees all day long. And then over in one corner of the house area, we had a blue and gold Mongol, and then we had 5 poodles and a cat.
Jeez.
So, yeah.
Wow, very interesting.
Sound like
My dad never turned down an animal. I mean, this lady came chasing this dog out, and Dad opened the door up and stopped. Says there's a problem, and dog jumped in the car. It was a little Chihuahua, and she said, "I'm just trying to get that one to take him down to the lake." Dad says, "Well, I live on the lake. I'll take him down to the lake for you." And she's like, "Good," but he wasn't going to put him in the lake. That would be the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
So, then we had another dog called Scruffy, and my dad and Smoke had gone out to dinner one night and asked me to, give the dog a haircut, and I said, "No problem." Never asked me to do that to a dog. This dog was part poodle and something else. I gave it a head. I gave it a mohawk, gave it a Russian goatee, left its hair furry, gave it Russian boots.
Looked like Nikolai Volkov, right?
Huh?
It looked like Nikolai Volkov when you got done, right?
Yeah. We called him Sir Scruffy after that, and Dad took the clippers from me after that too. So he wouldn't let me do the clipping anymore. But do you know where the Sportatorium is?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was going to ask also. Your dad initially did some stock car racing announcing in Tampa Bay, and then he did ring announcing. I heard for $5 a night, and then he got the gig as the lead announcer for the Championship Wrestling from Florida show in 1960. Now, I guess, how did that come about that he got that gig, and was he a wrestling fan growing up?
Not really. When he was working in Florida on the as a disc jockey, he started bringing the wrestlers in to interview them because back then it was only one other sport besides wrestling, and that was highlight. So he would bring them in and do some interviews with them. So that's how they got to know him. And Cowboy Luttrell heard about him through this. Right. And yes, he did stock car racing. He did the Sunshine Speedway, which was a flat track. He announced there. And then they built Golden Gate Speedway in Tampa, him and Frank Derry. And he announced there. And then he announced also at the Florida State Fair that they had wrestling at the fair, and they also had stock car racing. So he would announce those two there. But he loved it. Actually, if he could give one sport, I think he would have definitely just done stock car racing.
Wow.
He was good at it. And that was one sport he followed all the time. Even after he retired, he was always there watching the races on Sunday.
Okay.
But yeah, Cowboy Luttrell, he had another guy. He had Salty Saw Sam doing the announcing, and then he had Milt Spencer, and he fired both of them. And then that's when he hired my dad, because he was doing the ring announcing. And Dad asked him, before the first show, he says, "How do you want me to call this?" And Cowboy told him, he says, "Call it like your job depends on it." And he was like, "Okay." Yeah, so he called it legit. Back in those days, a lot of the guys, these announcers, kind of looked at wrestling as being funny, and fake and all that, where he approached it as a legit business, a legit sport.
Oh, you could tell just the way he conducted himself that, it was very legitimate to him.
Yeah. And he enjoyed helping the guys out that were new in the business of teaching them how to do their interviews, and he always worked with them. Never once really belittled anybody that I know of, but was there. His job was to put them over, not himself, but put them over. But by putting them over, he put himself over.
Got it, right.
Right.
And he always treated them with respect. Whereas with Vince McMahon doing that pie thing with I can't think of his name now. I think it's you don't go and beat up on your announcers and throw pies in their face and stuff like that.
Right.
Mean Gene got the pie in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the days.
Yeah,
I just don't see.
I was going to say the way he treated Jim Ross towards the end there was infamous as well. He was notorious for being unkind to his on-screen commentary talent.
Yeah. And if they didn't, Dad never could work for Vince. Vince offered him a job on Black Friday when they went in and Vince had bought out the WCW. And Gordon was up there and he offered him a job and Dad turned him down. And his reasoning was, and I've heard a couple stories, is that somebody said that he didn't like wearing tuxes. That's not true. His reasoning for not accepting it with Vince was he always believed that you go home from the dance with the person you went to the dance with. And now that's saying something about the people back in that generation, where today it's not the same.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why he didn't take that job. And I don't think he would have ever wanted to work for Vince just because of the way Vince would would be telling him what to say. And, my dad's whole thing was to talk about the matches that are going on, not talk about everything else under the sun. And that's what they kind of do today.
Did Vince want him to come to New York? Is that, or
not to move, but he wanted me to come up there, to work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I don't think it would have worked. And I'm not saying something that people don't know, but my dad drank a lot, and so at nighttime he was, he'd been in a bar and he'd had a few too many drinks, but when he wasn't, he was perfectly fine, but he couldn't announce when he had too much to drink.
Well, was it a kind of a thing where he did, he had his roots in Florida and he wanted to stay there? Was that a part of it as well?
I think so. Even though I don't think Eddie did him any great favors, never sold him any of his stock. Stock was offered to my dad after Eddie died and before WCW. CWF started going down. That's when he was offered stock, and he was kind of like, yeah, somebody wants me to buy stock now when the ship is going down.
Right.
He wasn't too kind on that. And plus the way he was, then the way he was let go was, miserable for him. There was no farewell, week of saying goodbye to anybody. They just basically came in and said, we're going to start taping 2 shows a week. And that way only have to pay for 1, and my dad was not he's like, wait a minute, I'm producing 2 products and you only want to pay me for 1, and I think everybody knew that he would quit at that point.
And that was under Eddie Graham?
No, Eddie had already died. Eddie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it was under the Duke and the other guys.
I see. Okay.
Because Crockett was coming in and buying the company up, which actually never really happened. They were doing it, but then there was I guess you just call it another screw job in the industry. They went down to Miami. And a lot of this has to do with Dusty Rhodes too, before they had, while Eddie was still alive, Dusty'd gone to do a show with Crockett, and it was a pay-per-view show. Then afterwards, when he came back, I'm sure he reported it to Graham, but really hit the boys with it, saying, "Look, they're making more money. They're bigger shows. You should look at jumping ship." And eventually, everybody did. They jumped ship, but they went to Crockett's group.
Right.
Mhm.
And then Dusty ended up getting fired from there after a while. But it was kind of sad, because Dad worked so hard, to build that up, help build the company up and everything, and then all of a sudden nobody's there that that they worked hard at getting to where they are today. And Dusty even owned a portion of Championship Wrestling from Florida. So I think that might be the reason why Dusty has that nickname of the Nightmare.
Okay.
Well, I want to tap into the chat here for a second. What you were talking about sparked a good conversation. Shout out to everybody, by the way. You guys are awesome and continuing to keep a good conversation going. Monty asked if you think your dad would have done well in today's wrestling.
I'm not sure my dad was a corporate man. If he could deal with the corporation aspect of it. I think he was more for individual companies, individually owned companies. And I say that just because I know how, again, it comes back to his drinking days. When he was done working, he'd be at the bar, and then from there he'd be coming home, 4 hours later. So he had a problem with his drinking. So I think the corporate aspect would not have liked that as much, but individuals, I had no problem, because he'd do a show, he's done. He went on to doing another show. That's why he was flying different places and doing different shows. They were individual. And I think Dad had thought that down the road, wrestling would eventually go back to regional wrestling, which probably would be the best thing for wrestling for that to happen today. Because when they go to the big shows, you're only going to be in one state, in that state, maybe once or twice a year. Whereas you got guys that are training to become wrestlers. Well, they need to be out there wrestling all the time.
Right.
And not seeing the same face day in and day out and day in and day out. That's why they would have the matches where loser leaves town, or they get your head shaved or stuff like that, to get people to leave for a while, and then they come back. Now, does the internet change that? Yeah, because you can't be a baby face in one, and then you turn on the internet and you see now he's a heel in another place. You got to, to me, I always thought it should be that if you're leaving one territory and you're going to go to another territory, find out if you're going to be a heel or baby face, and then leave that territory as that person.
Right.
If you're was a baby face, you want to become a heel and be a heel over there, do it, and then have them leave town, matches. But, and plus you'd have more guys working and getting the experience, where now you just have, WWE has a stable of 100 and some guys, maybe 200 guys that they're paying.
Yeah.
Right.
But they're not getting their experience and working on their game. They're sitting at home waiting to get called. But if you had them, like, if Florida if championship wrestling from Florida hadn't closed, what would have been a good thing for that is to add your players down there, your wrestlers down there wrestling and working the territory. But then let's say if it was WWE, they would come in, and wrestle maybe 2 towns, but have their wrestlers, the WDE wrestlers, wrestle against the guys that are local, to build up their names and everything. And it's just something that would give more and more people the opportunity to make some money. Because granted, back in the days, the promoters didn't pay the wrestlers a great deal of money. They were always keeping a good portion of it. So.
But on the flip side, though, anybody who was in the CWF loop, a regular, like we had Bugsy McGraw on a couple of times. He wrestled between 250 and 275 times a year. So even if you're an under guy in CWF, you're getting that experience because you're working every night.
Yeah. Well, these guys today, like the one out in Iowa, and I'm not going to mention the group's name, but they only wrestle maybe a couple times a month. That's not giving you a lot of experience. To where, if you're wrestling and the guy throws you the wrong way, if you've been wrestling long enough, you tend to know how to fall where you're not going to injure yourself. And also the thing is, when you're wrestling, you want to make sure when you throw the guy, you're not destroying him, because you might be having to wrestle him tomorrow. So it's people that first is knowing how to wrestle for yourself, but also know how to treat the guy you're wrestling against, so you're not, putting them out of action. It was never meant to put anybody out of action. It was meant to let people think that you're putting somebody out of action, but you're not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's that. That's actually perfect. Next thought. It's that serious sell. Tom in the chat said he compared your father to Walter Cronkite, and I think it's important. We had Shane Russell, the son of Lance Russell, famous Memphis announcer, on the show a few years back, and we try and stay away from the Mount Rushmore comparison. It's kind of become cliche. We've actually had some guests in the past that don't like the idea of making a Mount Rushmore because they know they'll leave somebody off. But cliche being what it is, if you were to make a Mount Rushmore of wrestling announcers, your dad, Lance Russell, would be 1 and 2 without question. They were both absolutely wonderful. And as Tom pointed out, your dad was very much a Walter Cronkite. He was serious. He had the authenticity of the action, whereas Lance was a bit more animated. Did your dad, because you mentioned it, wanting to call it serious, did your dad intend to be the honest everyman type commentator, or was that just kind of what came naturally from what he was doing?
That was just his style. When he did the news for the radio station, just his style, the way he presented the news and everything. When he announced the stock car racing, it was just to be professional. So I think that's how he just took it. It was his job to do and be a professional. He did say that he always thought his equal in the business was Lance Russell. And I'm hoping that not next year, but maybe the year after that, Lance gets the Gordon Solie Award out at the Luthez and or George Tragus and Luthez Hall of Fame.
The one in Iowa.
Yeah. I got him to do the plaque because I had mentioned it to Jerry. I said, you got all these wrestlers in there, everything. I said, but you don't have anything with our announcers. And I says, it's important because your announcers are the ones that, if you didn't have the announcers announcing the matches, you'd have 2 guys out there beating up each other and you wouldn't know what's going on. Your announcers are the ones that tell the story, and they keep the story going on and on and on.
Right.
And they're the ones that deserve the recognition. So Jerry agreed with me. So they did the Gordon Solie Award, and the first person that got it was Jim Ross.
Nice.
And
Okay.
Second guy that got it was, and I wasn't all that, I didn't know anything about the guy. So he's married to. He has a podcast. He's married to Ric Flair's daughter.
Oh,
Conrad Thompson.
yeah.
Yeah, he got it. I would have rather had the announcers and not the podcasters, because I think the podcasters should be their own award. But then you could also. I'm sorry, what?
No, I was agreeing with you. Wrestling podcasters are the worst.
Yeah. So I just thought that, you just do the announcers and do the guys that started announcing back in the 40s or in the 50s, because those are the guys that helped build this business. Now granted, you don't have to do an announcers award every year, because obviously it'd come to a point in time where you'd run out of announcers, it is. I'm hoping, and then they did last year Tony Schiavone, and I know who they're doing this year, but I'm not allowed to say yet. But I'm hoping the year after that they're going to do Lance Russell. I've been pushing for Lance from day one, but I only have one vote. So we'll see what happens. But even also the CAC kind of disrespected my dad at this last award, because I brought it up to Brian Blair that they had never given my dad an award. The CAC, he's been mentioned as an honorary, got an honorary award, but that was back in 1990. And they honored like 10 other people in Florida, so it wasn't really an award for it.
Kind of a
but Brian and I don't really care for each other. I just I'm just not a big Brian Blair fan, and so he decided not to honor my dad, but decided to give the award and name the award after Jim Ross. And I'd been, promoting this for the last 2 years, 2.5 years, probably.
Shame, especially with his Florida roots. Shame on him.
Yeah,
I know, and especially when my dad helped him so much when he first was getting into business, on doing interviews, and helped him on his books and everything else. And then he does this Legends Lunch, which actually was started by him, Buddy Cole, Hiro Matsuda, and my dad and Jack Briscoe. They were the ones that started meeting at Ivanhoe's. I think it's Ivanhoe's or Ivanon's, but old Malio, one of the Malio owners. And so they started just meeting for lunch every 3 months, and they called it the Legends Lunch.
Right.
Well, Brian says it started in 2000 or 99, when actually it started back in the late 80s. And he put my dad down as being a co-sponsor, not as a sponsor of the award. So I didn't appreciate that. I thought that was, he just didn't tell the truth, but he has a history of that. But he didn't give him the award, and gave it to Jim Ross instead. So I want nothing to do with the CAC.
Interesting. Jonard, WWE about a week and a half ago, it was a week from last Saturday, they had their Bad Blood premium live event. And during, which was actually, I was just talking to Jimmy Farrow about it this afternoon, the CM Punk Drew McIntyre match was really, to me, a great match, probably one of the better ones I've seen in years. But during the match, CM Punk busted open Drew McIntyre, I think for legit, with a toolbox. And Michael Cole, who I will never be a fan of, but he did use the term Crimson Mask. And I marked that when I heard that. I thought, damn, like he's using a Gordon Solie term. So how does it feel like that your dad's jargon and lingo, years after he retired, people still use his verbiage?
It's cool. It puts a smile on my face when I hear things like that. And but it's what's interesting. My dad passed away 24 years ago. People still talk about him. They still remember him, and they go, "Hey, he was my childhood days. When I grew up, he was the guy I watched. And kids looked up to him. That's why he had a lot of respect for kids. Because they looked up to him, and so if he was here today, he'd have a smile on his face. And I think a lot of other guys still use it today. But I think with him, Vince used to always be in Tony's ear, or not Tony. It shows you I'm not watching them that much anymore. But Vince was always talking to the guys when they were announcing, telling them what to say and everything. That's why I said my dad would never be able to work for that.
Right. He's definitely his own man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
although I've never heard anybody use say supplé. I live for the day when somebody says supplé.
Yeah.
That was great. I love that. I look forward to that every week.
Yep. Yeah, he had a good choice of words when he came out with them. Sayings and everything.
But he was very specific, with the holds, and made sure that whatever hold it was, he made sure he said what it was.
Yeah.
He was different. In the WWF, a lot of it was just kind of brawling. But Gordon made sure that he made sure whatever hold was being applied, he specifically, and a lot of times, like you said, he would explain why that would hurt, where it would hurt, which was different than most announcers.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had I listened to maybe my age is catching up to me. Arn Anderson, not Arn, but Ole Anderson just sit there one time in an interview, just cut my dad down left and right because he didn't like the way he did his announcing, because he described everything that was going on in a match. When he would grab their arm or would twist it and stuff like that. He was like, they don't want to know that stuff. He said, I'm sick and tired of Gordon Solie saying this stuff. Well, hell, he was doing his job. He was announcing exactly what was going on in the ring and what you were feeling.
Well, bottom line, he was the lead announcer for what was arguably the premier territory in the country, maybe save for New York. But Florida was, to this day, to me, Florida, if you have a Mount Rushmore of territories, you can't have that without CWF.
Yeah. Well, and Eddie was smart when he bought CWF from Cowboy Luttrell. He saw the advantages Florida had that a lot of the other states didn't have. You couldn't invade his territory from the west. You couldn't invade it from the east. You couldn't invade it from the south. And the only way you could invade their territory would be coming in from the north. Well, you had the other guys, his buddies, they all owned Georgia Championship Wrestling at the time. So they weren't going to invade, so his territory was really to all his own.
Right.
So if somebody did finally come in and try it, but then they were having a big show over there in over in not Gainesville, Daytona. So they had a big show on that same day in Daytona. So they crushed the crowd. But that's how they did it.
Nice. Yeah.
I think if these independent promoters today got together with each other, they could actually start forming some groups like another NWA, and just start sharing their wrestlers and don't worry about the greed. The money will all come.
Right.
Because there's people out there like in Fort Myers that would go to wrestling, and all these little towns around there that would go.
Oh, yeah.
Just looking for something to do.
Well, I want to go back to the audience here for a minute. We've had some great discussions, and a good question came up. Excuse me. Well, actually, I want to spin back. You had mentioned your dad being quite fond of alcohol. Can you settle a discussion, a debate we're having here? Was it gin or vodka his drink of choice?
Vodka.
Okay, so it was a vodka tonic. We weren't sure.
Yeah. Yep.
And going back, Monty had another question that I think is a great one. It was very uncommon back in the day for announcers to anybody to get physical with announcers. We talked about when we had Crockett on promoting the reunion show and his he was here in Virginia for George Pontus's retirement. We talked about him taking the Russian sickle, and it was very rare to see announcers get physical. One of the highlights that pops up a lot, your father getting being physical with Don Morocco. Do you have any idea, like, what was it specifically? Because obviously your dad would have had to have signed off on that. Do you know what it was about Morocco that he trusted to take that bump?
Yeah, I saw your little cat run off out of the room.
Yeah. Anytime we my cats get more screen time than I do sometimes, and certainly have more fans.
You're talking about the one up in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Is that the
Yeah, I think Piper intervened on his behalf, I believe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was it was somewhat of a work, but wasn't meant to go that far. Because Dad's had his hip replaced. So those things, he just wasn't supposed to go that far. Of him getting knocked down. But yeah, he was made aware of that situation. But most of the times they never once touched him, because Eddie said the wrestlers are the wrestlers. They don't pick on the announcers.
Right.
Yeah. So that they kept that way. So that way, I think it was just more of a looked like more of a bump. Yeah. Than anything else.
Pretty tense moment, though.
Yeah, no, definitely, because especially somebody as universally beloved and respected, you just kind of didn't want to deal with it. And Will said you're right. Piper came in, hit him with a roll of quarters, the infamous roll of quarters, deadliest weapon in wrestling history.
He borrowed it from Baron Cicluna, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you obviously your father bounced around a lot, and something that came up else in the chat as we kind of get ready to wrap up here. Your father ended his career in WCW. Now, he infamously was approached. I don't know how many people know this. He was approached for the ill-fated Legends of Wrestling pay-per-view, but couldn't because of health issues, which is great. I'm glad he didn't soil his legacy by being anywhere near that dumpster fire. But he ended his career in WCW. Obviously he spent I think it was 6 years there. And the story being he resigned from WCW in protest of Angelo Poffo being inducted into WCW's Hall of Fame. But the question from the crowd was, if you're, did your father ever talk about, because obviously a man, because you mentioned he's not really a corporate guy, but he a consummate professional, he would have had issue, or did he have issue with the inmates running the asylum era of WCW that he was in?
He pretty much kept that to himself, but you could see it. It's like, especially with Eric Bischoff, because Bischoff told him one time he was doing a voiceover, and it was a tag team match, and he brought up we're going to be watching an Australian tag team match. And Bischoff stopped him and said, "It's not an Australian tag team match. It's a tag team match." And he told Bischoff, he said, "Do you remember where tag team matches started?" So they started in Australia. That's why it's always been called the Australian tag team match. So he wasn't a real big fan of Bischoff, especially one day he wasn't even there. And Dad was like, "Where is he?" He says, "Well, he just had his wisdom teeth taken out, so he's home." And Dad was like, "I had my hip replaced and I kept coming back." So, I mean, when he had his hip done, he actually, the next morning, he flew to Alabama to do a show. then when he got done with the show, he flew back to Atlanta and did a show. And then after the show, he went back to the hotel. I mean, back to the hospital. He just didn't believe in missing his show.
Wow, that's a trooper.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think he was a little disenchanted about what was going on in WCW.
I can respect that. Well, like I said, as we kind of get ready to wrap up, Benny, I started. Final question to you. What are you thinking?
Yeah. Well, seeing that your dad started with CWF in 1960, I mean, he had one hell of a run. I mean, almost 30 years.
Yeah.
And like I said, to me, like I grew up in New York. I was a Bruno. Bruno's still my hero. But I almost think if I had to do it all over again, I would have loved to have grown up where I live now in Newport Richey, because I could have went to the Homer Hesterly every Tuesday night, I think it was.
Yeah.
We had, so I could have went at least 52 times a year. Where, in New York, I could have maybe went, once a month or maybe twice a month. But, we had Bugsy McGraw on the show a couple of times. And he mentioned I guess it was like 1979, 1980, for that 2 or 3 year period that, I mean, he told me the loop. I know Tampa was Tuesday, but it was, included Miami, Orlando, I think West Palm. But that and the couple of Fort Myers did spot shows, Sarasota. But for that 2 or 3 year period, like almost every single show was either sold out or like close to sellout.
Yeah.
You think about it now, WWE has this gigantic creative team. And but who they have? They had Eddie Graham, maybe Dusty at times. Did your dad? I guess a couple of questions. Did your dad have any involvement in the storylines? And two, like while this was all happening, did your dad realize the magnitude of just like how good, CWF was?
He didn't have anything to do with the storylines. He let Eddie do that because Eddie was just a professional at it. As to the magnitude of it, I don't think he really realized in the very beginning what was going to happen or how it was going to change his life. And it changed his life in a lot of ways. Just the notoriety, people asking him for advice. But of course, then too, a lot of people wanted to be his friend, and that happens a lot of times. But he handled it well. I mean, he never. What do I want to use? He never bragged about it. He was just, I'm just Gordon Solie, And he told me, one time, he says, son, just remember, yeah, I'm your dad, but you're nobody. When I sat there, went, okay, I got your drift. Because he didn't want me to be some little kid out there like, yeah, my dad's Gordon Solie, like some of these little kids out there today. But no, he was a very humble person. That's what I found so interesting about him. He was just humble as hell. I mean, when I was I ran a basketball team. We were the USBL, United States Basketball League, and he came to a couple of my games that I managed, and he was like, he says, I'm proud of you. He says, you're humble. And he says, and that's what you should be. It's just always be there for people and answer their questions and be kind. And that's just the way he was.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Very good advice. Jonard, I can't thank you enough for your time. This has been awesome. We say this a lot about wanting to have you back. I mean, Benny and I, we had a good list of questions. We barely scratched the surface of it. A lot of what came up in the chat. Again, thank you for the chat. You guys are awesome. I'm going to pitch it to you. Do you have one thing I do want to kind of maybe not pitch, but you mentioned to Benny the possibility of starting your own show, being involved in something like that. Can you kind of give us a final thought on that?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things I'm doing. Is right now I'm working on. I had over 60 16 millimeter films that my brother Greg had taped, or filmed when they were at different house shows or big shows. So I'm turning those. I'm digitizing those. So I'm going to be releasing those hopefully within the next year.
Oh, wow.
And these will be matches back in the early 70s.
Oh, cool.
Oh,
Really
nice.
good classic matches.
Oh,
Not all of them have my dad's voice on them, so I'm going to get somebody to do the voices. But a lot of them do have his voice, and I have a lot of tapes. I mean, interviews that people interviewed him. I even have an interview of him interviewing Don Shula.
nice.
Oh, nice.
So I mean, so I'll be working on that, and then I've got a podcast that I've been working on, and just trying to get it up and going. It's going to be a very simple podcast. It's going to be no nonsense, just common sense. And I'm not really going to talk about wrestling. I might bring up a story every now and then, but I want to just talk more about the logic of things today in our world, about people using common sense, like with the politics. I didn't want to do it during the politics this year, just for simple reason. There's too many crazy people out there, that you mention one thing, then they want to shoot you because, that's not the guy I'm rooting for. But I want people to think about things before they do it. Look at what the effects are, of something you're going to do. It's like I had a guy come out to give me a quote on redoing a bathroom, and he quoted me $16,000. Well, I got it done for a while.
Yikes.
Yeah.
I did a lot of the work, but I found other people to do the work a little bit cheaper, and this guy was wanting to do a $5,000 profit for himself.
Yeah.
I don't mind paying somebody, but when all I wanted him to do was this one section, so what I do is I get all the figures, the costs and everything from the drywall to the mud and everything. I say, okay, so it's going to cost me this much. Okay. What can I do? So I figured out what I could do. I could build the wall. I could drywall it. I could mud it, but I can't do the plumbing. I don't do flooring, so I got a plumber to work and I got the other guy and got it done. But it's just how you approach things in life, like taking care of your car, or taking care of, like, you're planting plants outside your house. Why would you plant them right next to the house? Move them out a good foot and a half away from the house. So if you got to go paint the house later, you don't have to trim the plants to paint the house.
Stop.
I like to make things simple, so that's the stuff I want to give out. But I will also deal in politics too. It's like I'll say, have you actually really read about this person, not read far right wing stuff or far left wing stuff? Go to stuff that, when I hear a story, I look to see if it's been repeated 3 or 4 or 5 times. If the story's only been said once, then I know the story's probably not true. It's somebody that's creating a story. But I'll still look it up just to make sure that I'm right, and then I'll do it when I do my and I'm gonna do one more post on my Facebook of why not to vote for a certain person. But I want to put down everything I know about this person. Say, look up the facts. It doesn't take any time to look up facts. We were taught that when we were in school, to look up facts, and that's all I'm going to do. Is just go by that, but I want it to be fun, and I'm going to have some comedy in it, different things like the guy, Wally. Is it Wally? The big beaver that's, in front of these gas stations. I'm going to do something like maybe I go up and pretend like I'm talking to him and he's answering.
Oh, at Buc-ee's?
Yeah, Buc-ee's.
Yeah.
Just find different funny things that, make people laugh. Because there's just too much hate out there in this world today. And plus, I couldn't do a wrestling podcast because there's just too damn many of them.
Yeah. Like I said, wrestling podcasters are the worst.
They are terrible.
Yeah. No, they're pretty good.
This has been great. Like I said, we appreciate so much. And obviously Benny and I are both big fans of history and territory, and have been fans of your father since we were old enough to watch the tape. Well, he saw some of it live. I was watching tapes. Benny's a few months older than I am. So,
A little bit.
But yeah, you've been wonderful. Everybody, again, thank you. We're live, Monte and the Pharaoh, the chat. You guys have been great. Everybody that's been very active, great questions. We love talking. This is episode 199. I do want to pitch. Benny and I have a big news. Next week is episode 200. For those that have been around with us for a few years now, know that our 100th episode featured Hall of Fame legend and still Olympic record holding supervillain Ken Patera, just at one of the best heels in the business. Phenomenal stories, no filter whatsoever.
Done.
But definitely, we're coming up on episode 200, top 5 episode ever. He has a new book out, and Ken Patera will be joining us next week for episode 200. So 100 and 200. We said we'd bring him back for part 2. Part 2 will be 200th episode next week with the legend Ken Patera. Anybody that loved wrestling in that age has to respect the work he's done. And of course, a lot of good stories about the Olympics. They changed the rules on how overall lifts are measured. So his overall lift record will probably never be broken because he did 4 lifts. Now it's only 3, but that's, here we are, 1972. He was there and still holding the record. So that's going to be a great show next week. Ken Patera, episode 200. We would not be anywhere near 200 without great guests like you, Jonard, without everybody that's live in the chat. So again, I can't thank you enough. This has been great stuff. So for Benny, obviously the playa himself back from the hurricane, I'm Dan Sebastiano. Jonard, I'm going to give you final word. We have one way to close this show. I want to hear it.
This is Jonard Solie for Gordon Solie saying so long from the Sunshine State.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.